Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Rowing Chat. I'm Rebecca Caro, and today I am joined by Annie Vernon. But first, let's have a quick message from our sponsors. Rowing Chat would not be possible without the support of brands and businesses who help us to bring you this show. Our first sponsor is Rose and Thorn, who make active sports bras with a difference. Have you ever wondered what technology is used to design a bra that's both comfortable and fits most women's unique shape and size? Rose and Thorn studied sports bras and found that most use a design which compresses your chest to prevent bouncing. They took on the challenge and they've engineered forgiving fit technology to make the Rose and Thorn active bra. A fully wired bra designed to keep your bust exactly where it should be, giving a more confident you. The active bra is built using one of their 5 unique shape designs. It's called the On-Form shape, and that's the base design. And it has, in addition, a very soft high mesh neckline designed to literally prevent your boobs from falling out when you're leaning forward. Added shoulder straps give extra comfort, and the double layered back panel gives you extra support. Sizes go from 10 double D to 20 E, meaning there's a size that's perfect from you. The testimonials they got from customers during March and April 2019 include Wendy M saying, "I just love this bra. Finally, no popping over the top, which I've suffered in the past. It's so comfortable to wear. I highly recommend it." And Gina C wrote, "At my size, I struggle to buy comfortable bras at a reasonable price. So when I found this website, I was skeptical, but I'm so happy with my purchases." You can use Rose and Thorn's Pocket Bra Guru tool to find your ideal size. It compares your existing bra style with the Rose and Thorn size chart. Just Google Pocket Bra Guru. It'll take you 5 minutes to find out. And Rowing Chat's got a discount coupon for you. The coupon is ROW10, ROW10, and it gives you 10% off your purchase at the checkout until the 30th of July 2019. Follow the link at www.rowing.chat/sponsors. Our second sponsor is the Mind Games book by Annie Vernon. You can win yourself a personally signed and dedicated copy of the Mind Games book. It's all about how elite athletes train their minds to help them win at sport. To enter, tell us what gives you the impetus to win. Write a comment on the page rowing.chat/win-mind-games-book. And if you want to buy a signed copy, you can buy them at Rock the Boat UK. You'll find both those links in the show notes and on rowing.chat/sponsors. Now, on with the show. Annie, welcome to Rowing Chat.
Thanks very much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in the sport of rowing.
So I grew up in rural North Cornwall, which now is really famous for gig rowing. So gig rowing is kind of big open water rowing, big wooden clinker boats, fixed seats and big heavy oars. And now, I mean, there's something like 200 to 300 gig clubs in Cornwall alone. But when I was so showing my age now, when I were a girl, none of that really existed. And my first foray into rowing was in Olympic class sliding seat rowing down on the River Foy in South Cornwall. And rowing back then, I mean, it's a really small club then. It's now huge, but back then it was pretty small. And it just seemed a good way to try a new sport and meet some new people and see a part of the county that I didn't know very well. And I guess things went from there.
And let's tell the listeners where you ended up.
Well, so I started out rowing on the River Foy in South Cornwall and ended up rowing at the Shunyi Regatta Lake in the Beijing Olympics and the Dorney Lake in the London Olympics. So yeah, I was lucky enough to have a career that took in 7 World Championships and 2 Olympic Games, and I retired after the 2012 Games in London. So yeah, pretty privileged, and gosh, what a journey from such inauspicious beginnings.
Now, were you part of the World Class Start talent identification program?
I was, yes. So the World Class Start program in rowing is billed as we take people who've never rowed before and make them into Olympic champions. But the reality is it often finds people who have rowed a bit. And at that point, I was a student in Cambridge. I'd rowed in the boat race for Cambridge against Oxford, and I wanted to go and see if I could do under 23 national trials. But at that point, and things are very different now, but at that point, there was no pathway to do trials. There was nobody who could teach me to scull. I didn't even know where I could get a single scull boat from. And that the World Class Start scheme had just started, and that seemed like a really good pathway for me to see if I could, if I could take that next step on the British pathway. Because of course, you look back and with hindsight, you say, well, that was, I did this, this, and this, and then I went to the Olympics. But at the time, you have no idea how good you're going to be. You have no idea if you want to do it, and you have no idea what that pathway looks like or feels like. So at the time, I think for every athlete who ends up as an international, when they're young, when you're a teenager in your early 20s, it really is just one step at a time. And for me, that big step was being a part of the World Class Start scheme, which was coached by Adrian Cassidy in Cambridge, and being a part of a group of about, I think there are about maybe 5 women and 5 lightweight men. And one of the other women was Anna Watkins. So we both started rowing there together and both ended up going to Olympics together. So, and we remain very good friends today.
Fantastic. What a great pathway, and how fortunate you were to have Adrian as your coach.
Indeed, yeah.
Now, your book is called Mind Games, and it's all about mental skills for sport. When you were at that, let's call it a mid-stage of your career, you had identified that you wanted to go further than university rowing. How did you first start to become acquainted with the contents of what was in your head?
I think, I don't think I'm saying anything controversial to say that I think people in their early 20s think they know it all. And I think when I was in my early 20s, I thought I have all the answers. I don't need to know anything about mental skills. It's just there. It's fine. I'm tough. I'm hard. And it wasn't until I went to my first World Championships that my coach, I was in the single scull, and my coach at that point, Nick Strange, he said, the sports psychologist was there with the team. The World Championships were out in Japan, so he was there with us, and I'd never really met him before. And Nick said, "Why don't you go and have a chat to Chris Shambrook?" And I said, "Well, what are we going to talk about? What's the point in that?" And he said, "Well, you never know. You never know what you might learn from a conversation." So I went in and sat down and started talking to Chris about my racing, and he was asking me all these questions and getting me to start thinking about things I'd never thought about before. And there was all these things that I thought, well, of course everyone feels like this, and of course everyone starts panicking in a race when it starts to really hurt, around that 1 minute marker, and of course everyone feels a bit all over the place at a World Championships. And he just said, no, none of this stuff has to happen. You just need to come up with a plan and understand your brain and understand what's right for you, and come up with some pre-programmed thoughts that are going to kick in at a particular time. And all these things. And I honestly, I remember now walking out of the room and feeling 6 inches taller. And I thought, wow, that's one conversation. And I know for a fact I'm going to go faster now on the water. And I think when you can come up with a game that makes you go faster without training harder, just thinking differently, why wouldn't you take that game? So I suppose that was the start of my understanding of sports psychology, and also my relationship with Chris Shambrook, which has always been very, very close. And I worked with him, regularly until the end of my career.
Chris is an amazing man. I heard him speak at the British Rowing Conference back in the day, and wrote a very detailed page of my own notes during his speech. And it's an article I refer back to regularly. I would very much like to get him on this show, so maybe we can fix that up. Now, there are 3 words I'm going to say to you, and I'd like you to reflect on them: nature, nurture, and training. How do they work in rowing?
So that's the kind of pattern I took in my book. So I looked at a number of different mental skills. Let's, for example, take confidence. And the way I looked at it is that some of your confidence comes from your nature. It's just there. Some of it comes from nurture, i.e. your upbringing, your childhood. those messages you got from your family and friends and parents during your, really formative years. And then thirdly, it's training. It's when you're in your adult environment, in our case, as in the British rowing team, perhaps it's in other sports, perhaps it's in the workplace, how you reinforce your messages and reinforce your social norms that then deliver to you what your confidence looks like today. And I think the first step, nature, when you're talking about any mental skill, it's so hard to isolate. I think it's so hard to point at anything and say, well, that's just in your genes, that's just there, it's just always there. Because as I'm now finding as a parent of a 1-year-old, it's impossible to separate what happens before, what happens naturally in a child and what you instill in it, because right from day one, everything you do shapes that child, because there's no sense of it just being a blank canvas. It's absolutely a blank canvas that you're painting on from, well, not even day one, from day minus 9 months. So then there's nurture, and again, it's that to me is the really interesting bit, because that's the bit that happens pre-elite sports. That's the bit that happens when you're a kid at home with your family, with your siblings. It happens at school. It happens when you're on the development pathway, in the age group pathway, in sports. And that, I guess, the nurture bit is really probably where the key learnings happen. And that's almost what delivers you to the start line of your elite sport journey. And then the training is just, well, you take that bit of you and you repeat it and train it again and again and again and again until you pop out the other end. And yes, you might appear like a very confident person, but that is a direct product of what you've done to your confidence over the preceding lifespan. So, but it's the nature bit which I really tried to get into in the book. How is there anything there with reference to sporting mental skills? Is there anything there that we can point at and say that is nature, that is genetic? And I think the only person that I really found gave me some kind of answer on this when I was researching the book was Brian Moore, the England rugby player who won, I don't know, nearly 100 caps for England and played for the British and Irish Lions, and absolute legend, and is now a commentator. So he was really interesting because he said, well, look, I was adopted. So he was adopted as a tiny baby. I forget how old he was, but very, very young. And he said, I never really understood why I was so driven. When my adoptive parents were very relaxed, they were, I believe, they were very religious. They were very kind of calm, relaxing influence on me. And he said, I'm self-confessing, I'm a pit bull. I'm out there, I'm fighting, I'm picking fights with everyone. And he said it wasn't until I met my natural mother when I was in my mid-30s, and she was just like me. She was a pit bull. So I suppose, of course, and I'm sure you could isolate other things in his nurture that created that kind of attitude. But he was probably the one person who could actually point at it and say with some degree of confidence, that part of my personality, that is nature. That's where it's come from. And then obviously once he's in the elite sport environment, it becomes trained. But I thought that was really interesting, and it really made me reflect on yes, how we can separate the nature from the nurture from the training.
Now, if a rowing coach is listening to us here today, or an athlete who wants to try something, can you give them an example of something they could train to give confidence, and how?
I think the issue with confidence is, and I really get into this in the book, it's that it's just such a hard term to actually use in a practical sense. And when I started talking to people for the book and gathering my thoughts on it, most people turned around and said to me, look, we don't like the word confidence. We don't use it. It's too vague. It's not relevant to us, which I found fascinating. And certainly I agree. I never use the word confidence, because what is confidence? It seems too vague a concept to be something you can really use in elite sport, in your armory of defined things. And so most people have come up with another definition, some of which is something around belief, around honesty, around trust, around composure, around momentum, around kind of just delivering the plan, getting it right in the day. Chris Shambrook, in fact, he said to me, the phrase he uses is confidence personality, by which he means, are you confident you can be yourself today? That's confidence. If you're happy that you can go out and you can totally be yourself today, that's confidence. That's what you're aiming for. Personally, I guess I used to take a slightly different slant when I was a rower. I used to say, I used to say to myself, on my best day, I'm good enough to be the best in the world. And that to me didn't mean that I was going to be the best in the world. Demonstrably, that wasn't always the case for me. But it meant that, in my heart of hearts, when the big question was asked, my answer was, yes, I can do this. And actually, that's, that sounds self-evident, but there's a heck of a lot of people who get very, very far in elite sport who don't have that belief, who don't necessarily think they are good enough to be there. The fraud mentality that people talk about so much, that exists to the highest level, I would say, in sport and in all walks of life. So that was my confidence definition, if you like. I managed to get myself to a point where I could genuinely look at myself in the mirror and say, yeah, you could be the best in the world on a particular day under a particular set of circumstances. Whether or not you will is a different matter, but you can be. It's possible. And that, I guess, was my foundation for my confidence.
And how did you begin to train that into yourself?
It was probably 2 years. It was a long time before I truly could believe that about myself. And I guess step one is recognizing that there's a gap there. Okay, recognizing, do you know what? I don't really think I can be here. I don't really think I can necessarily win the World Championships or win the Olympic Games. And then it was all those mental skills that people talk about. It was visualization. Can I honestly sit there and imagine myself crossing the line in first place at the World Championships? Okay, right, let's imagine what that might look like, that might feel like. What evidence is there? Okay, the girls I'm training with, they've all been to the Olympics. A lot of them are world champions. Am I as good as they are? Yep, sometimes I am. Yep. Okay, so there's some sense of being in the right ballpark. But then I guess, you have good days. You have days where you perform out of your skin. And again, it's training to train yourself to focus on the good days. So you don't say, oh yeah, I did that really good ergo, but then I backed it up with just a dreadful weight session. Don't focus on the dreadful weight session. Focus on the amazing ergo, or, the day you came top in time pieces. Well, hang on to that. Ignore the time you came last, because that's because what you want to know is you want to see the flashes of brilliance to know it's possible. If I've never ever pulled, I don't know, let's say you're trying to break 7 minutes on the ergo. I'm trying to think, is that 145 split? I think if you've never ever seen a 145 on your ergo screen, the chances are you're not going to be able to maintain that for 2,000 meters. But if occasionally, when you're doing ergo pieces, let's say you can hold it for 500 meters, okay, so maybe it's possible. There's evidence there. If I can do it for 500, let's see if I can do it for 600, then I can do it for 700. So I think it's finding the right evidence that backs up what you want to know. Because I guess, ultimately, my experience in my second World Championships, when I was 24, I was in a double scull with Anna Watkins, and we came fourth. We were, I don't know, about a tenth of a second off the bronze medal. So it was a really, crushing, and it was a home World Championships as well. It was in the UK for the first time in 20 years. So it was very much, it was all set up for us to win a medal, and we didn't. And it was after that I think we both went through just a huge period of self-examination, because we were capable of doing it and we just messed up. And I think we kind of unpacked everything about our race, and there were so many things we did wrong. But I think when I unpacked everything about our rowing, I got to the heart of it and thought to myself, but did you actually think you could have won it? And the answer was no, I didn't think I could have won it. No, I think at best I was maybe good enough to snatch a bronze. And we nearly did. We nearly did snatch a bronze. But I thought, is this why you're rowing, to try and snatch a bronze? And I kind of thought, no, I want to row to try and be the best. That's, I don't want to win a bronze medal. I want to win a gold medal. So I think that was my starting point, is that when I really, and that is sport, isn't it? That's why sport's so special. It does force us to ask ourselves those huge questions. And so I think once I've had that experience and confronted myself with this big question of, did you actually think you could have been the ones in the middle of the podium? And the answer was no. I thought, well, in that case, I better start believing I can, because I don't want to go to another World Championships and mess up. And a huge reason for that is just not, not having that deep-seated belief that I can be there. So, and it certainly wasn't overnight. Like I said, it was 1, maybe 2 years of convincing myself that I could be there. And then I did win the World Championships, and then suddenly, well, there's your evidence. You are good enough to be the best in the world. And then I guess for me, I then tried to reset my goals a bit and think, well, okay, fine, I've done it with Catherine Granger, and I've done it with, Fran Horton, and all these amazing rowers. Can I do it with, on my own, or can I do it with other crewmates? So I suppose you're always trying to redefine your confidence in that sense.
That's a fantastic answer. Thank you. Now, what is an emotional driver? This is a phrase you use a lot in the book.
You'll have to remind me in what context I use it. I mean, I'm not pretending. I do know the book off by heart, obviously.
Really? Extraordinary. It's like your A-levels. You talk about the things that it's in the context of the nature nurture chapter.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing it's one of the things that you can leverage to create the outcome that you want, harnessing a single or a group of emotions.
Mm. I guess it's about what you tap into when the going gets tough. What are the things that you draw on? And again, I think that's why sport is different to life. I'm not pretending that sport exists on a different planet, but I think in sport we do have those one-off moments where we have to stand up and be counted. And I just don't think that exists in life. You don't get those one-off days where everything is asked of you. And so because we have these one-off moments where we are confronted with our, our kind of deepest fears and insecurities, we do have to figure stuff out about ourselves that we perhaps wouldn't have to figure out if we never had done sport. And I don't just mean elite sport, I mean sport at any level. So I think it all of us athletes at any level have to understand what's driving us. And for some people, that's the team. It's the other people around them. For some people, it's themselves and what they want to achieve. For other people, it's being the underdog. It's proving people wrong. For other people, it's trying to show off that you're the best and you're so confident you're going to win by miles. I guess one of my emotional drivers, and I talk about this in the book, is the fact that I'm from Cornwall, and for me that was a really big part of my identity. And obviously it's a pretty unique place down here, and I think people who grow up in this tiny little corner of the UK, we are aware that it is a bit of a world apart, and we are a bit of a breed apart, and that that was a real motivating factor for me to try and express that through my rowing. And I suppose it's not it's not a huge thing. It's not like we're all got our weaknesses and insecurities tattooed on our chests, but I think again you have to understand what's driving you, because if you don't know what's driving you, if you don't understand the engine, how could you drive the motor, so to speak?
I certainly have experienced that myself when I'm in a race situation under pressure and I sense that there's an opportunity, usually to get a medal when perhaps we weren't going to get a medal. I get very aggressive, and I have turned around and said some pretty harsh things to people in the crew, which I usually have to apologize for afterwards. And there was a situation reasonably recently, which one of my crewmates knows all about. And part of my emotions under pressure, which brings me to a phrase that really leapt out to me when I read the book. You talk about talent needing trauma, and this is a concept I have never heard before. Can you explain what it is and why it's an important part of mind games?
Well, this is something that came up when I was reading a lot of literature about success. So that research psychology around success, of course, is massive. It's probably the most researched area. How do you, what is a winner and how do you create one? Obviously, who wouldn't want to know the answer to that? And increasingly looking at youth sport and development level sports, the emphasis seems to be, actually, are we doing kids a disservice by handing everything to them on a plate? You know, are we preparing young athletes correctly for the challenges of elite adult level sport by giving them nutritional support, you know, coaching, driving them to training, paying them for this, paying them for that? Is this really the best way to prepare kids for the rigors of adult life and for adult sport? Or actually, should we be challenging them and seeing how they come through those challenges? And in fact, I recently, and I wish I'd seen this tweet before I'd written the book, but I recently saw a tweet from Judy Murray, the tennis legend and all-round wonderful ambassador for British women's sport. And she said, she summed it up far better than I could ever do, which is, prepare the child for the path, not the path for the child. And to me, that's the phrase, you know, the rocky road to success, why talent needs trauma, which is the research paper that I cite in the book. That sums it up. It's, let's not smooth the path for the young athlete. Instead, let's prepare the young athlete to tackle whatever path lies ahead of them. And it's interesting because all the research, all the literature agrees that generally the people who go on to be successful in the Olympic Games and so on and so forth, they often aren't the ones who are the junior world champions. They're the ones who came fourth at the junior world championships or perhaps didn't qualify. You know, the people who are setting under 16 world records are not the ones who go on to be multiple senior medalists. But it seemed to me that everyone agrees that, but people aren't necessarily doing anything about it. So if you look at talent development systems in professional sports, so football, rugby, cricket, tennis, golf, they're trying to smooth the path. They're trying to prepare the path for the child. Equally, I think professional sports, they're trying to pick up young people earlier and earlier and earlier, when all the literature says early specialization is the worst thing you can possibly do. So I guess it's frustrating that all the experts agree on this, but the way that professional sport is going is the complete opposite. And I guess it's when you spell it out like that actually talent does need trauma, and talented kids need to be tested in ways that will challenge their resilience. It makes perfect sense, but then putting that into practice is the really hard piece, I think. And it's this question of resilience, which every kid in every school these days is taught about resilience. Well, actually, let's see how we can do that in sport. Let's see how we can do that in elite sport, and almost use that as a test bed for how we can filter that through into life and into schools.
I used to coach young juniors at Tyro Scullers aged 10 to 14. And at that age, there are very few children competing. There are also very few regattas that will offer competitions for age group classes for those ages. And we tried to develop resilience. Say we had 3 boys who were all 13. So they were all in the under 14 category. The least fast single sculler we would put in the under 14 category. The next one would go into under 15, and the next one would either go into under 16 or they would go into novice open. And we explained to them all, once you have won a race at a competent regatta at under 14, we're going to make it harder for you. And would you describe that as a way of putting children into a situation where they're challenged?
For sure. Yeah. And I think it's things like that. It's not hard to come up with ways to keep challenging people beyond their, get them out of their comfort zone. But it's just exactly what you've just described. It's kind of a simple yet effective way of doing that. But by absolutely the same token, I'm, like I said, wrestling with parenthood now. The idea that, when my little boy faces any kind of hardship, that the idea that I'm going to do anything other than jump in and try and help him, it feels so counterintuitive to everything you want to do as a parent. But I guess that's the point, is we have to learn this is not the right thing. They have to make their own mistakes. They have to be challenged. And that's how they develop resilience. And much as, I want to cosset him and protect him and tie him to my apron strings, I have to accept that that's not the right way to do it.
certainly in my sporting life, I've met some unbelievably talented people, and I now teach adult beginners. And there are definitely people who come into the class who find the sculling movement, which is a learned movement, no one can do it from day one, that some people find it easier to acquire than others. One of the things, though, that I have observed, and interestingly, it was usually in the context of physiotherapy and rehabilitation from injury, is that the talent gene doesn't involve working hard, that working hard, for example, at your recovery plan after an injury, and that often the really talented athletes are quite lazy. Did you ever see that?
That was something when I interviewed people for the book that a lot of coaches really agreed with. They almost said we hate the talented ones because they've always had it easy, and then they get to the next step up and they don't get the bit in the middle. We want the people who aren't quite as talented, who always had to fight, which I thought was interesting. And but at the same time, and I think this is quite a critical theme of the book, I almost think it doesn't matter how naturally talented you are or not. It's what you tell yourself is that matters. So, I mean, take Anna Watkins, who I know really well. She's a very good friend, and she would probably say, "Oh, I was an outsider. I always struggled with this part of rowing and this part of rowing. I really had to fight to prove myself. Really had to fight to get my place in the boat, and then really had to fight, for my medals." But I'm sure that from the outside, somebody else would probably look at her and say, "Hang on, you're one of the most powerful women in the world. You've got an aerobic capacity of a T-Rex. You've got an absolutely rock solid race brain. You're just incredibly methodical and a wonderful person to row in a boat with. You haven't got any disadvantages. You've had it all easy. I've had to fight." So my point is, it's almost reality doesn't really matter. If you feel like you've been challenged and you've had to fight, you've had to come through it. That's the critical bit. I think the reality of whether or not I'm more disadvantaged than someone else isn't as relevant. It's almost how we as humans respond to it and the messages we take from it, I think, that are the crucial thing.
Fantastic. I read a book once about Sir Winston Churchill and how, as a young child, his mother taught him that he was born to be a leader of men. And obviously he grew up with that belief. And yet what I'm hearing you say is that a lot of people that actually having an element of disbelief, whether or not it is 100% valid, that actually that is often a more useful trait in achieving your goals.
I would say, yeah, I would say. I mean, it's just, I think apart from anything, it's just having that self-awareness. It's just having that ability to understand what's happening to you and you're in control of the situation. So like I said, it's being self-aware that, yes, I might be Anna Watkins. Yes, I might be phenomenally powerful, but I still have to fight my corner every step of the way and, fight like a dog if I have to. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And like I said, focusing on the bits that are character forming rather than saying, well, I've got this amazing aerobic capacity, I'll be fine. So I think it's definitely what you tell yourself is the important bit, I would say.
I want to move on to talk a little bit about decision making under pressure. When we are training, many of us train to race. And of course, once your coach has pushed your boat away from the pontoon, you're on your own, and the race during the race you cannot be supported is the rule in the vast majority of racing situations. How can you train decision making under pressure?
Well, this is something that I went into in quite a lot of detail in the book, which I found really interesting, because rowing is a sport where, yes, there's decision making, but it's not the kind of decision making around tactics that you have to carry out in, say, rugby or football or hockey or tennis. The decisions you make are pretty simple.
Give an example. Push now.
Well, I mean, I guess the example I'm thinking of is races I've been in where either we've been going really well or we've been going really badly, or another crew has done something really unexpected, or we're in just a completely different position than we thought we were going to be in. And that's when someone in the crew has stepped up and made a big call that afterwards you might have thought, gosh, what the heck did you say that for? But at the time, because you're so in tune and you're so what's the word, so committed to whoever's doing the calls, whatever they say, you don't even think, you just do it, don't you? And then afterwards you might sit back and review it and say, I'm really not sure you made the right call there. But at the time you can't think that, you can only do it. And again, I guess that decision making under pressure in rowing, that only comes from practice and training and having done it lots of times before, and also knowing that in rowing, 10 of you doing what you think is the best thing, 10 of you, 9 of you doing the thing that you think is the best thing is a waste of time. All of you doing one thing, even if you're not quite sure it's the right thing to do, that's what will win you the race. But looking at other sports, which through the book I had the opportunity to do, decision making is a really it's not left to chance. It's a very explicit part of training. Annie Panter, who was in the British women's hockey team in the London 2012 Olympics, she'd been to the Beijing Olympics as well, but London they won a bronze, and she would talk about just over that period of 8 years that she was on the team, the training changed from being kind of, can you execute this skill under pressure, to, okay, we trust you can do the skills, can you think under pressure? So they would quite literally play kind of frantic five-a-side hockey games, then stop and have to answer some questions about, who's the last prime minister, and then play another game, and then, someone would hold up some cards with some numbers on, and they have to remember what order the numbers were in. Which sounds, I don't know, it just sounds really interesting from the outside that people would do that. But she said, this is how, and I don't know if it's still done, in that way now on the hockey team, or if things have changed, but this idea that decision making in itself is a skill that you can train and you can get better at. And again, I feel that's something else, that there's a bit of a disconnect between elite sport and the commentators and the media and the public. I think they think that, Owen Farrell, for example, always makes the right calls on the England rugby team because, he's Owen Farrell, he's fantastic. And the chances are, well, no, he's an exceptional rugby player, but that's because he's trained every part of it, including that decision making. Of course he has.
It's very interesting in business, which is where I spend most of my time. Decision making under pressure is exact parallel of sport. And the opportunity to gain or lose is similar. There are board games, and I'm just looking for them. There are board games where you can practice decision making in a team, and it's called marketshare.co.nz. And you can buy this board game and practice it with the people, presumably in your crew or in your business team. So I have no idea whether it involves the same as holding up numbers in your 13 times table, but that is definitely something. There are tools out there, but maybe you should look outside of sport to find the tools to practice in sport. Yeah,
possibly. Yeah, maybe that is an area that sport can learn from the workplace. But yeah, certainly it's, and this was the message time and again from everyone I spoke to for the book, is that, every single part of our skill set can be trained, and we do train it, and nothing is left to chance. Which is why, in the book, I talk a lot about this word instinct, because people use it so much in sport. Or, I made that decision because of instinct, or I instinctively knew that I should have, kicked the drop goal rather than, try to pass out and go for a try. And I guess the conclusion I come to is that you can't talk about instinct in sport. It's not instinctive. If you're in a rowing race, it's not instinct that you decide to push because you just, it just felt like the right thing to do. It feels like the right thing to do because you've trained yourself to understand rowing as a sport, yourself as an athlete, and the rest of your crew as a team. That's why it feels like the right thing to do. Instinct is if someone hits you in the knee and your foot flies up, that's instinct. So yeah, people use the word instinct, and I understand what they mean, but it's an outcome of the mental training that you've done.
Definitely remember a time in my own rowing career where I learned from a much more experienced athlete. We were at Ghent racing in an 8, and Kate Groves, who's also like you, a Cambridge graduate, and who went from Cambridge into the national team without a pathway. She was in the crew, having come back as a masters athlete. And I remember her sitting in the probably 5 or 6 seats and yelling at the cocks that we needed to push. We had drawn level with the crew who had been leading the race. And she obviously knew that you need to push past them if you're going to win the race. It seems obviously very obvious now. And I just came off the water after that and went, she read that race so well. And I then just started watching and listening to her. And we actually rowed in small boats together. So I got to, be in the boat where she was doing the call, and realized that her awareness of more than just the way she was rowing, but her awareness, almost without looking, of what was happening in the other crews and the other lanes in the race, was a massive contributing factor to the decisions that she made. Do you remember doing that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Now, I want to move on to talking about competitiveness and perfectionism. Now, two really big words. Are you a perfectionist, and how does that intersect with your own competitiveness?
I wish I were more of a perfectionist, but unfortunately I'm a bit slapdash. I think everyone's competitiveness is different. And again, this is something that was really interesting looking at for the book, because every single athlete I spoke to had a different take on competitiveness, why they were competitive, how they were competitive, and what it meant to them. I think my competitiveness, again, the whole nature nurture training. Rowing is a team sport. It's a squad sport. You're going to be in a big group of people, so there's always someone to find to compete against. You can always look at the ergo next to yours, or see what somebody else is lifting in the gym, or you never do. It's not like you ever do an 18K singles outing on your own. You're always next to someone else. I grew up in a big family, so again, it was just always someone to compete against. And when I was at school, I had a good group of friends who were all really good at sport, and again, we all competed against each other. So I think as a product of my environment, I'm now, or adult me is very competitive. I'm always trying to find someone to score points off. But everyone's different. For some people, their competitiveness is very personal. It's kind of, what's the best version of me, and I'm competing against that, and I don't care what anyone else thinks. For other people, it's a form of perfectionism. I know I can do better. Let's see if I can push myself to be the best person that I can. So everyone, I think, has a different take on it. And again, it's that self-awareness piece. It's what is my competitive personality, and how does it drive me?
Tell me a bit about courage, because I guess you've been in some pretty scary situations, and courage seems to me to be something that comes to the fore at the moment when you need it. But is that just a naive view?
What do you mean by courage?
The ability not to run away in fear.
Again, I mean, I would say it's trained. I think in elite sport, I don't know if courage is the right word to use, because it's a situation you've chosen to be in. It can seem intimidating, but it's your job. You've trained yourself to be there. So for sure, that first time you sit on a international start line, you look across and there's a 6'6" Ukrainian on one side and a 6'10" German with with an Adam's apple on the other, and you think, gosh, what am I doing here? But I guess that's part of elite sport. You break those people down, not as in physically, but you break them down into, you understand their people. You recognize they're probably just as nervous as you were before the race. I mean, the advantage of rowing is you do all share a changing room, and you share a toilet, and you share a shower. So actually you do see people before the race, and often they are, standing in the queue for the toilet looking green, just like you are. So I don't know if it's that you learn how to be brave, but you certainly learn how to, not give people too much respect, and not put them on a pedestal, and not think they're something they're not. in my second year on the rowing team, when I was still, really green, myself and Anna Watkins were in a double, and we were racing the pride of New Zealand, Georgina and Caroline Evers Swindell. And I mean, gosh, that was an intimidating experience. Um, you know, Identical twins, reigning Olympic champions. I think they both had world records on the ergo. They didn't talk to anyone. They didn't even seem to talk to each other.
Oh, really?
So in terms of intimidation, there was every single box was ticked. And I think in fact, I remember the first time we raced them, we just absolutely crumbled because part of anything, oh my God, I'm racing the Swindells. This is just such a massive moment for me. And then I think that was stroke one, and then stroke two was, and they just took off.
Oh, whoops, they've gone.
Yeah, they've gone, and we're dreadful and came in last. And in fact, it was the second regatta, the second World Cup that we raced them at that year. That was 2006. And we really did talk a lot about how do we take them off their pedestal? How do we make them seem human? How do we burst that bubble? Because, we'd been building them up in our heads. Because apart from anything, it's such a privilege to race two complete legends of the sport, and who would go on to be Olympic champions again in Beijing. And it was something we talked about a lot. And really, I think our strategy was just, well, let's see them as human. They're just like us. They had this crazy race profile as well, which you probably remember, which involved them kind of tanking out the start and doing a ridiculous first 500, and then the rest of the field would close on them. So again, we thought, well, right, we know how they're going to race. How do we deal with it? Okay, we know how we're going to feel looking across on the start line to see them there. How are we going to deal with it? So it's just planning and humanizing. But yeah, that first time we completely went to pieces. And the second time they still beat us, but it was by a tenth of a second or something. So we felt like we'd scaled that mountain.
Fantastic. Were you and Anna psychologically quite different people? And when you became the crew together, where were the places where you were the yin and she was the yang?
I think in every single psychological marker, Anna and I would be polar opposites. I don't think there's many that we'd overlap on. We both love to race. We're both really competitive. I guess that was our common ground. But she's kind of by nature a very positive, very upbeat, very sunny personality, whereas I think I'm a bit more of the glass is half empty. She loves training. She loves competing. She loves kind of, she loves putting in the massive performances, whereas I think I'm a bit more, I just want the day-to-day to be spot on. I want every stroke to be perfect. Whereas she'd say, look, it doesn't matter if every stroke isn't perfect. Let's trust ourselves a bit more. And she's definitely full of confidence, and at that point I was probably not as confident, and so it took us a long time to find our common ground. In fact, I don't think in that first season we did find our common ground. It took us a second crack at the whip of the double a few years later that we finally established how to row together. But Anna's obviously just a phenomenal athlete in every sense and a wonderful person. But we had a few teething issues in those early years.
As an athlete on the team, obviously the coaches are looking at you and assessing you in formal tests, but also day-to-day training. And I remember overhearing two athletes from the women's squad of a generation before you. One of them was complaining bitterly how in all of the training pieces she was beating the other, but when it came to the tests, the other one would pull out a massive performance. How do you think that reflects on how the coaches perceive those two people?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because some people are like that. In the book, the chapter that I look at racing, I title it Train Like Tarzan, Compete Like Jane. And this came from a comment from a coach that I interviewed who said, yeah, he had athletes that trained like Tarzan and competed like Jane. And I suppose, the holy grail is to train like Tarzan and compete like Tarzan. But ultimately, I think some people are really driven by training. Some people love to train. I'm probably in that category. They love the day-to-day. They love the flogging themselves. They love the mileage. They love the detail, the minutiae of getting it right, again and again and again. And other people aren't interested in that, but they love the big days. They love the head of the river. They love Henry Royal Regatta. They love the World Cups, the World Championships. And that's where they get their buzz. I think probably Catherine Granger is definitely in that category. She's someone who just lives to race. I mean, is obviously phenomenally good at the training bit as well, but, you know, is really driven by the racing. So I guess for the coaches, that must be frustrating because, you know, for some people, there is that almost that magic bullet that they don't see because they only see it on race day, because that's when they find their A game. Whereas other people, their racing is a reflection of how well they train. But I think, yeah, it comes down to what drives you personally. I think people are driven in different ways, and that affects how they train.
When you've been in a situation where coaches have selected crews, and I'm generally thinking of, 2 to 4 man crews, do you think the coaches take these things into account when they're considering not only who's in the boat, but also which seat they sit in?
Do you know what? Selection in rowing, well, as you will know, I think it's probably the toughest sport to select, I think. Because, I mean, take any other team sport, let's take hockey, for example. You can't say that striker A is better than striker B. It will come down to the coach's call. You know, striker A, you play in a slightly different way, we want you in the team. Whereas in rowing, the coach has to make exactly the same decision, but because it's an endurance sport, everything's monitored. So the coach could say, do you know what, Annie, you know, you're really good, but we want Rebecca in the team, not you. But I could turn around and say, well, hang on, I've beaten Rebecca on every single singles trial, every single ergo, and all the seat racing. So how's that fair? So it's actually, I think, really hard for coaches to select teams in rowing when sometimes, as we all know, you know, a team will click, even though the individual athletes aren't perhaps as talented. But, you know, if you select a weaker athlete over a stronger athlete, you've got to justify that decision. When in other team sports, you don't have to justify that decision because there's no way of, in hockey, for example, saying that striker A is better than striker B because there's no endurance data. So I think selection in rowing must be a massive headache for coaches because they have to justify the decisions, but sometimes they'll make a decision that goes against the evidence. And maybe that's why, you know, perhaps Jürgen Grobler has been so phenomenally successful because he can make those tough decisions, and because of his amazing track record, you know, he can make the calls and is less beheld to the data because he's, you know, whatever he touches turns to gold. So yeah, I wouldn't fancy being a coach.
In New Zealand, they have independent selectors. Sometimes coaches are on the selection board, but they try to take selection away from the coaches. So they'll say, right, Coach A, you are coaching this crew and we've picked them.
Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, I think they have something similar in Australia. And I wonder if in this country we need to move towards that rather than having, you know, a chief coach who's also a selector.
They do want chief coaches who are also selectors. So it isn't always quite as clear cut or clean, but it's a reflection that there is no perfect method of selecting crews, that there are different approaches.
Precisely. And fundamentally, the proof of the pudding's in the eating, isn't it? Yeah. You know, if the crew wins by photo finish, that coach is a visionary. If the crew loses on a photo finish, that coach is an idiot. Yeah. And, you know, it's a crazy, but that's sport, isn't it? Sport is a crazy world.
It is. Now, you've obviously retired from professional sport at this time. Can we talk about about post-sport and the transition out of being a professional athlete? Did you notice anything in your transition?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think in any kind of transition in life, let's say retiring from a job, let's say changing, you know, having a massive career change, ending a relationship or a marriage that's perhaps lasted a decade, you know, all of these things are just massive upheavals. But sports, I think, is probably more so because the fact that it affects you so physically. So the second I stopped being a rower, I stopped eating 4,000 calories a day. I stopped exercising for 6 hours. I stopped sleeping for 12 hours. I stopped drinking, you know, however many liters of fluid. I started drinking alcohol again. You know, there's all these things that, that physically your body completely changes. And of course, if you're not exercising, you don't get those endorphin hits. You know, you don't get the buzz after exercising. So yeah, I mean, I don't think hard is the right word to use, but it is an upheaval, and I think it's challenging if you make it challenging. But certainly, I found my first Olympics, Beijing, that period after that, just really, really difficult to process. So, when I came around to London, I was pretty sure I was going to retire after London. I set up loads of things, put loads of things in place so that I didn't have that kind of big low. But I think the exercise thing is quite hard. I think once you've been an elite athlete, it's quite hard to put sport back in your life as a hobby again, once it's been your job. I don't think rowing will ever really feel like something I can ever do for fun. But so I've turned to other sports. But again, it sometimes feels a bit schizophrenic to just go and do a half marathon for fun when you've been to the Olympics. So I think that's the thing I've probably found it quite hard to adjust to. It's just finding a place in my life for sport that's just exercise and health and fun. And I mean, I finally got there, but I've been retired for 7 years, so you'd hope that I've got there by now.
Does British Rowing give guidance and advice to athletes as you come to the end of your professional career?
It's definitely getting much better. Yeah. Things have changed a lot in the last 8 years. I mean, it's probably less so British Rowing and more UK Sport and the English Institute of Sport that kind of picks up the baton there. As you'd expect, British Rowing is there to, to prepare the team to win medals. Whereas I think when it's all over, those other bodies step in, I think, and do a lot of that welfare, the careers training, the networking and all that. And it's, things are much better now. I mean, I think after Rio, they had this huge careers fair up in the Ricoh Arena in Coventry, where, hundreds of employers were there. There was workshops about writing CVs. There was so much more support than there's ever been before. So I think certainly, the institutions are waking up to what they need to do, which is that they do have a duty of care to athletes, and they need to recognise that they do have a role in helping them move into the next phase of their lives.
I definitely think there's some real challenges legally if you think about employment legislation. If I work for a company and I do something and they want to fire me, they have to give you written warnings, and there are some very clear legally bound processes and procedures. But if you get injured or you fail to get selected after you have been a full-time employed paid athlete, you are let go in a day. And I am slightly challenged as to how that works legally. Do you know anything about that?
Well, of course, there was the Jess Varnish test case, employment tribunal, where she tried to persuade them that British Cycling were her employers. And I mean, I followed it really closely, and I haven't read the decision, which I need to do. And I spoke to I've got a very good friend who's an employment lawyer, and I spoke to her about it. And I'm really surprised that she lost. Now, I don't want to say that I wish she'd won and that she did, she was able to say that British Cycling were her employers, which was her argument, because I don't know what that would have done to British sport. I mean, that is a huge, huge can of worms. Like you said, how you manage selection in sport and also adhere to employment law. I mean, that just seems like there's going to be conflicts at every turn. But would that mean the athletes are more protected? Possibly. So, like I said, I'm surprised that she didn't win from what I understand of the principles of her case. So I don't know if there'll be more cases like that in future. But certainly, I think, like I said, I think UK sport is really at the forefront of trying to change things and having a more athlete-centred approach. And things are definitely changing, even in the last 4 years, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, accusations of bullying in the workplace in sport are a very fine line between encouraging better performance and I am unclear what the technical legal definition of bullying is, but it seems to be an axe that has fallen pretty harshly on sport. There have been situations in the UK, situations in New Zealand, and I suspect in other countries that I'm unaware of. And it's jolly, jolly difficult, I think, to make a decision that is both legally appropriate, but also reflective of the quality of person who has been employed, whether they're coach or athlete, and involved in the team often for many years. And, would you say Jürgen Grober is a bully? Well, it's very hard to say, but boy, does he push some amazing performances. And as a fan, I am delighted but we also know that Mike Spracklin, who was, I think, before your time in coaching the women's squad in Great Britain, he was very well known for being an extremely tough, demanding performance coach. And there was a real binary reaction to him from the women in under his charge. You either adored him or you found it extremely challenging.
But I would say, by the same token, I don't think that changing behaviour is just in elite sport. I mean, I would say that, for example, the way that perhaps when I was at school, the way that teachers talked to me, and the discipline, and the detentions that we had, I would say if you did that in a school today, you probably wouldn't be allowed. You wouldn't be allowed to talk to kids like that. So absolutely, there are relics of a previous age left in elite sport. But things are changing. I mean, the younger coaches that I interviewed for the book, and I interviewed a number, they're a completely different kind of person to the old guard. That there isn't any shouting, there isn't any ego. There's just, right, what do you want to achieve? How can I help you achieve that? And it's a much more athlete-centered approach, modern sports coaching, and it's absolutely time to change. I mean, how long ago was it that Alex Ferguson kicked whatever he kicked and hit one of his footballers in the face who had to have stitches? I mean, you just can't imagine that happening even now. Even in professional football, you cannot imagine that happening. So things are changing. I guess the only thing that came across from my research, my book, which I guess really worried me, is, and absolutely, this isn't pointing the finger at any particular coach, but so many of the athletes that I spoke to had stories of what can only be described as emotional abuse, terrible treatment from the hands of their coaches, just awful offhand comments that destroyed their self-confidence. And I think with some coaches, I'm not sure that a lot of coaches realize the influence they have on young people. Because you've got to remember, people are elite athletes when they're late teens, early 20s. They're very, very vulnerable, whether they're girls or boys. They're very vulnerable. And they're desperate to succeed. And the coach is, aside from their parents, the coach is the most important person in their life. And, an offhand comment to a 14-year-old girl that she's looking a bit big, she could have an eating disorder for life. Or an offhand comment to a bloke that he's perhaps just not got it to, to compete on the big stage. Well, actually, that could destroy his self-confidence, and that's it for him in his sport. So, and I don't think a lot of coaches, particularly those who've been coaching for a long time and have had hundreds of athletes come through their system, I don't think they always think about that. I don't think that is front and center of their mind, that they have a huge influence on young people's lives. Yes, positively, of course, massively positively, but also negatively. And I think, if there's one message that I could give all coaches that read the book, it's just think before you speak. Just be aware that you've got young people's hopes, dreams, ambitions, personalities, lifelong identity in your hands, and just be careful what how you treat them.
Very wise words. Thank you. Now, I want to end with something that I forgot to prepare you for. I write a book each year called Rowing Tales, which is a curated anthology of stories about rowing, and they can be any sort of story. Now, can you bring to mind a story which related to your experience in the sport that we might be able to put in the book this year?
Gosh, I wish I'd had a bit of time to plan, or perhaps make something up. I don't know. I guess. Well, where do you start? I think that's the thing about rowing, is because it's a sport that you do have this unbelievable bond with your teammates that I don't think you get in other sports. I really don't think in other sports you have that intuitive understanding of your teammates. I guess it's always going to be the people, isn't it? It's the personalities. I think probably one of the, and I only remember this because I was talking to the individual concerned last night, is we were racing at the World Championships in New Zealand, Carapiro in 2010, and we'd won our heat by about 6 inches. We're in the quad, qualify for the final, us and I can't remember, the Ukrainians. Yes, it was us, the Germans, the Ukrainians were the 3 fastest qualifiers. Finals day dawns, and you probably remember it was just awful weather, just absolutely horrific, proper spring storm. I remember rowing to the start line thinking they've got to cancel this surely, and then you see the race before you go off and you think, oh well, they're obviously not cancelling it then. Fair enough. So we're sat on the start line, we're bailing, so our boat's full of water and sponging everything, trying to squeeze it all out. The start gun goes and we start, and I think because we'd kind of spent so long sat on the start line, we've been there for quite longer than normal, and like I say, trying to get all the water out the boat. And so Debbie Flood, who was doing the calls, I think she was either at bow or two. I forget where she was, but she was doing the calls off the start. And I think maybe at halfway we usually switch to somebody else doing the calls for the second half. And she forgot to do any calls. So we're going off, and you have, not that you need calls, you're so, particularly the first, 250 meters, it's all just like clockwork. But we can, we're not, I don't know, you normally have your little rhythm of calls. So, I don't know, 3 strokes, 5 strokes, 10 strokes, or whatever it is. And, we're kind of racing, getting out to length, getting to our rhythm, and suddenly realized that there's just silence behind me. I was at stroke. And I don't know, around about stroke 15, Fran Horton, who's sat at 3 behind me, just kind of says something. I think she'd realised that Debbie had clearly forgotten that she was meant to be saying things. So Fran just sort of said, legs? And then Debbie, obviously, this then clicked her into action. And then I think she delivered all of our first 250 calls in about two breaths. And then she was silent again for about another 10 strokes. And then she was okay. She was back in her rhythm. She caught up with herself, and then she was fine. And we won, so it was all wells that ends well. But we often laugh about this, the time that Debbie forgot to say anything in the World Championship final. So... But she won't mind me telling that story. But like I say, it all ended well because we won by length. So you can't hope for a better ending to a story than that.
Thank you. That is the most wonderful, wonderful story. Annie, it's been a delight. Thank you so much for giving us your time. A reminder to everyone that if you want to get a signed copy of a book, Annie has given a whole load of signed copies to Rock the Boat UK, and they are in stock now. So if you buy one, you'll get a signed copy. But if you want to win a copy with a personal dedication, go to rowing.chat/sponsors, and you'll see the page there where you can add a comment and go in the draw to win the book. We'll decide the winner later on this month, which is May 2019. Now, Annie, please tell the listeners where they can connect with you online.
So you can buy my book on Amazon. Please leave me a review. You can buy it on Bloomsbury and Waterstones and all the usual book retailing places. I'm also quite active on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, and I also have my own website, annievernon.co.uk. So if you read the book and you like it, or you'd like to get in touch further to anything we've talked about in the podcast, drop me a tweet, and I'd be really interested to know what you think, both good and bad. Hey, I've been a rower. I've been criticised all my life. I can take a bit of honest criticism. So do please tell me what you think.
This is part of the Rowing Chat network. You can get email notifications of all our new shows as they publish by joining our mailing list, which is at rowing.chat, and listen to the other shows in the network wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play Store, SoundCloud. We also are on the Rowing Illustrated boards, where if you wish to discuss any of the episodes, please feel free, and on the Reddit/rowing pages. Till next time, goodbye.